Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. Again, we are excited. We've got someone very interesting for you guys today. So we've got Helen Antrobus, who is a historian, broadcaster, author and museum curator. She's based in Manchester. She specialises in the lives of 20th century political women, and her latest book is called First in the Fight, 20 Women Who Made Manchester. Hi Helen, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are really interested in getting involved in this because we're actually going to be talking about women's fashion, more specifically 20th century political, well, not just 20th century political, but political women and fashion.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is a subject that I don't often get to talk about too much in my day-to-day work, so it's really like a little pet project. I think it's so interesting, and I'm really excited to tell you a bit more about it.
Amazing. Do you know what? Let's just kick it off because I know our listeners are like, just start. So first of all, what actually got you interested in women's fashion and more specifically women activists?
Well, I'm first and foremost a curator, and that is how I understand history and how I specialise in it. So it was really through objects and learning more about the objects that can tell us stories about protest and activism that I got interested in it. And it was when I was based at the People's History Museum in Manchester, which tells the story of the last 200 years of the fight for democracy and equality. And it's a really fantastic museum. If you haven't been, I would really recommend it. And whilst I was there, I worked very closely on the archive materials and objects pertaining to political women. It's a subject that I have always been really interested in. Even at university, I was on a bar crawl once and I dressed up as a suffragette for a heroes and villains theme, which should tell you a lot about how long I'd been interested in it for. And we had some fantastic suffrage collections, and we were coming up to the suffrage centenary in 2018, and I was curating an exhibition and programme of events called Represent Voices 100 Years On. And it was really about connecting the stories of suffrage and activism with kind of contemporary protest, and actually looking at how far we've come and how much we have achieved since women partially won the vote in 1918, but how far we had left to go. And one of the ways we did this was, of course, looking at the suffragette material and suffrage material that we had, which very much, it is very visual. It's very much about the sashes and the rosettes and the medals, all with those purple, white and green. It's very unique to the suffragette campaign. But we also did an open call out to activists to send in their objects and to really share with us how they protested, and there's one object in particular, and pink pussy hat was everywhere sort of in 2017 and 2018 after the women's marches protesting Donald Trump. But there was we were sent one of the pink pussy hats by a member of the public, but she also sent with it a letter that we displayed alongside it, which said, with every stitch I knitted my anger, and I just found that so powerful. And I started to look back through history, and you can see, in those last 200 years of the story we were telling, women had used their fashion and their clothes to really demonstrate what they were campaigning for in a world where they couldn't use much else because they weren't given the same rights as men. So that was how I got interested in it, and comparing past and present with these sort of threads of fabric and clothes and textiles was just something I found really fascinating.
I'm really looking forward to this because I know we've got some pretty interesting topics to talk about and various different fashion things. And one of them, I had to bring it up because we've got a film that, I personally love that film, but don't care how historically accurate it is. But anyway, before we get to that stage, we're going to start with the Peter Massacre. So can you first of all tell us what is it? When did it happen? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, so the Peter Massacre happened in August 1819, and around 60,000 people gathered in St. Peter's Fields in Manchester to an open-air meeting to hear a reformist called Henry Hunt speak out against the anti-corn laws, which kept the price of wheat artificially high, and to advocate parliamentary reform. And Manchester, even though it was a place of, industrial change, it had boomed so much, kind of changing from like a small cotton town. It didn't have its own member of parliament. It didn't have political representation, and the sort of treatment of a lot of the cotton and textile workers was really shameful. And political reform, many people believe, was the way out of this. And the reformers were demanding for votes for men, so kind of universal suffrage, but of course women were left out. Now, the magistrates in charge didn't like what was happening here. They tried to shut it down, and in the end they sent in the militia and the yeomanry. Actually, the number fluctuates quite a bit depending what sources you read, but around 18 people died and hundreds were injured after the militia attacked crowds who gathered very peacefully just to hear about political reform. So it's a really tragic moment, but it also can be seen as a real changing point in British reform and radicalism. Like the lives of Peterloo and the events of Peterloo impacted a lot of political change as well, and it was evoked quite a lot by the reformists who came after. So it's a really significant moment, and it's very significant for how women were involved, which is where fashion comes into it very significantly.
So how does women's fashion come into this?
Well, there's two stories really. There, on the day itself, at Peter Massacre, the Manchester Women's Reformist Society stand on the platform, the speaker's platform, championing this freedom and liberty that political reform would give them. One of the most famous women was called Mary Fields. She was actually attacked during the massacre, although she didn't die. But it's how women dressed on the day. Now, prior to Peterloo, there had been a cartoon ran about Blackburn female reformists who who'd stood on a platform in Blackburn a few weeks prior, and the way they're depicted and caricatured is dressed very kind of slovenly clothes. They're very exposed. They're portrayed as kind of, sexually promiscuous, and the way they're dressed is supposed to show that. And some of them are dressed quite masculine as well, like wanting to wear trousers. So on the day of Peterloo, it's very telling that women come in their Sunday best. Often they're dressed in white, which signifies peace and purity, and it is a symbol of how they want to be seen. These aren't women who are challenging, they're not asking for the vote at this stage. They're not challenging male authority. What they are challenging is corrupt authority. The other side of that with the dresses at Peterloo is that they are restrictive. And when you're trying to escape from, a man on a horse waving a sword, those dresses are going to hinder you. And, we think it's one of the reasons why more women were attacked on the day than men. That it is hard to escape, and also they're women. This isn't their rightful place. They shouldn't be here. So it's very telling how the way they dress and what their dress signified, and also how their enemies, in a way, dress them to tell a story about their lives. It's really fascinating.
I'm curious, how were these women perceived? Because you said there were women who were wearing trousers. How were they perceived at that time?
Well, they wouldn't have actually been wearing trousers. They were just drawn. So one of the women in the cartoon is called the Belle Alliance, which is a real twist on none of the women pictured in the caricature at all beautiful. In fact, they've been drawn with sort of pock marks and really awful features. One of them can hoist up her dress to reveal very kind of trouser-like undergarments, and it was just a point that the cartoonist was making to say this is what these women want. They want to be in a male position, authoritatively. And it was very telling how cartoonists, and we see it right up until the suffrage movement, we're still seeing that depiction of political women are drawn and displayed, dressed and looking in a certain way, and that's either trying to take on a male appearance or it's taking on the appearance of a kind of wanton, shameful woman. And that's why the women at Peterloo actively kind of repel that image. They dress very neatly. They dress to show the world who they really are, which is very clever, very intelligent, women demanded something that they are highly entitled to.
I'm going to bring up this film. I don't care if anyone's going to judge me right now. I love it. I think it's a great film. So the film, for everybody who's waiting, is The Duchess with Keira Knightley. So therefore, everyone should already know the name Georgiana Cavendish. So can you tell us, how does she fit into this whole narrative of women and revolutionary fashion?
Well, what's really interesting about, it's such a good film, and I'm going to say I love this film.
Thank you. Yeah.
The costumes in it are so stunning as well. And not everything is fabric accurate all the time. I don't want to get shouted for saying that, but and the Duchess of Devonshire, played by Keira Knightley, was a tremendously interesting political figure. The difference between Georgiana Cavendish and the women of Peterloo is that she is very rich. She is, she's aristocratic. She's of a class who can use their voices much more freely, even if you are a woman. And Georgiana Cavendish did that very freely. And her involvement here in this story of using political dress as a way to sort of show your allegiances comes a few years before the Peter Massacre in 1784. She was a huge supporter of Charles Fox, and who was the leader of the Whig Party, and campaigned for him to win the general election. And she kind of gathers together other duchesses. So you have the Duchess of Portland, Lady Jersey, Lady Carlisle, all of these very well-to-do women who dress in blue, which is the colours of the party, and have foxtails in their hats. And they go around canvassing and campaigning in the streets, which, is totally, not so much shocking, but just it gets people talking. And in all of the drawings from around the time, the foxtail is so visual. And it's such a clever thing to do. It's such a remarkable move because she's taking something so feminine. She's taking fashion. She's taking something that she knows people will pick up on and notice, because, of course, that's what people talk about. People talk about her dress and women in the media and women in the public eye. That's not changed in over 200 years. And so she really uses that and turns it on its head. And I found that so fascinating, that in the same way that anyone would wear a rosette with their party colours on, she's put a foxtail in her hat. It's just really clever.
She does that in the film, though, doesn't she? She kind of comes out with these new feathers and this and support, and she's out there when he's speaking on the, the balcony that she was out on?
Yes. Yeah, in the film you see her with the foxtail in the hat. I don't think you see her fellow female canvassers, but Keira Knightley definitely dons the foxtail. And it's very interesting because it actually, in the sort of negative press, you see Charles Fox being kind of held up by these women wearing foxtails. In one of the cartoons, he's being carried on like a chair with the four of them in their corners with their foxtail hats on. And again, it's that image of, this actually, why would you vote for someone who's being held by women? Why would you want that? That's not the sign of a strong male leader. So again, even though she's showing her colours and showing her support in such a strong way, that way is being taken and put into these caricatures and kind of abused somewhat. So it's the same treatment that women who are of much lower class than her, over 30 years later, are still being subjected to.
That kind of makes me a little bit sad, because I think she's kind of powerful. She uses her status to influence and to campaign for something she believes in.
Absolutely. And I think, what is really incredible about it is how little those things have changed. And today it's much more. We see so many women, particularly women in the public eye, wearing the colours of the campaigns or, charities or anything that they support, often being knocked down or challenged for doing that. We see it with Meghan Markle. It's exactly the same kind of treatment that, sees sort of strong women in the media, particularly those with influence and privilege, And, we see the same for working class women, absolutely. But particularly for women like Georgina, everything sort of comes at a cost, and that cost is often public ridicule.
So you actually do a lot of work on the suffragette movement, a movement that was it was worldwide, and it ran across the whole of the British Empire as well. So these women influenced the activist fashion movement, but how did they exactly do that?
Yeah, so I think this is probably one of my most favourite subjects to talk about. The women's suffrage movement has affected all of our lives as women and as people who can vote and people who can campaign and speak out about things. A lot of it stems from what the suffragists and suffragettes did. And for me, one of the biggest impacts they've had on campaign and activism is branding and marketing. In fact, they were some of the best kind of marketers in the business, and a lot of the way they did that was through using their colours of green, white, purple, which you see on banners, on rosettes, on sashes, everything, and they become so popular that even now you see, a lot of it's fake, but a lot of jewellery came out of that era in those colours because shops began to recognise that women would want to dress themselves in the colours of their movement. So, the women's suffrage movement was divided and fractured into very different organisations, but perhaps the most prolific one was the militant suffrage movement led by Emily Pankhurst, the Women's Social and Political Union, which we call the Suffragettes, which was a term coined actually by the Daily Mail as an insult, which was kind of reclaimed by the group, and the same word that we now use to identify them today. And very quickly they realised they needed that branding, colours that were recognisable, and they took the white, green and purple. There's a lot of conversations about what these colours mean, but Emily Pethwick Lawrence, who was a key suffragette, stated that the colours represented purple for dignity, white for purity, and green for hope or reform, which really summarised the movement. So immediately, if women were wearing these colours, whether on their rosettes or their sashes or their medals, they're the three things they're identifying with. And that's really important. Image is really important to WSPU. In their newspapers, before their marches, they share how one should dress and how you should dress and how you shouldn't dress. You shouldn't wear a massive hat because that might block, out of the procession. You should always wear Sunday best. You should dress smart. You could wear white. White was always very preferable. That was something that also happened in the American suffragette movement and for what it represents. And again, it goes back to really feminising themselves. In a lot of the caricatures and cartoons about the suffrage movement, they are displayed as very masculine. They're shown as dressed in kind of men's suits, or they're shown as very old, ugly spinsters. So they use their very public marches, their public events, to dress in very feminine, very smart outfits to really dissuade people from believing that caricature, and it works. It really works.
Why was it better to look fashionable, and who was Ellen Wilkinson, and how did she come into all of this?
So as we move out of the suffrage era, I guess, of the fashion, and post First World War, the kind of idea of how women should dress and how women should look really changes. And one of the women who represents that the most, and indeed when we curated represent at the People's History Museum, we used Ellen as an example of a modern woman in the interwar period throughout the 20s and 30s, who really used how she dressed and how fashionable she was to sort of demonstrate who she was representing in Parliament. So Ellen Wilkinson was a young Manchester Mancunian politician who became the MP for Middlesbrough. She was the only female Labour MP elected in 1994. She remained the MP for Middlesbrough before she lost her seat, and then in 1935 she was elected MP for Jarrow. And it was during this time that she was one of the leaders of the sort of famous Jarrow March, which was a march from Jarrow down to London campaigning against poverty. and unemployment. So she's a very notable figure. In fact, I would say that she's one of the most important female figures in politics and in social history of the first half of the 20th century. And she's very different from what. Firstly, she's inside Parliament. She's not on the outskirts anymore. It's not suffrage. It's not campaigning to get in. She's in. And when she's in, she uses how she dressed in Parliament very candidly. So her predecessor, who sits on the opposite side of the bench to her, is Nancy Astor, who was the first female MP to take her seat. Now, you can see the suits that Nancy Astor had designed for her when she became an MP, and they're very masculine, they're all in black, they're very severe. They were designed to blend in. She wanted to blend in with the men sitting around her. And, I can totally understand that because it was incredibly intimidating. But Ellen takes a different approach. This is an era where some women are able to vote, and Ellen is one of the leading voices campaigning for all women to be able to vote. If she's representing those women, she's got to dress like those women. So she shingles her hair, which is famous flapper style. She cuts all that off, and she wears very modern dresses, which draws a lot of attention. So much so that Nancy Astor actually takes her to one side and says, "You might need to tone this down." But I know, it's terrible, isn't it? And she actually comes forward, so that we don't have loads of Ellen's collections we didn't at the People's History Museum when we were doing the exhibition, but what we did have was all of the press cuttings about when she first became an MP, and it is incredible how many. This woman was a former communist, total socialist firebrand, who was 5 foot and in Parliament for the first time as an unmarried woman, and yet, which I would find more interesting to talk about than the fact of what she's wearing in Parliament. So many of the newspapers want to talk about what she's wearing. And Ellen is very canny because of this modern way of dressing. Not only is she showing she doesn't care what men think, it's a very feminist statement to come out in these newer, shorter dresses, but she's also using it to make a point. She actually says in one of the interviews, I can do my work just as well in a dress of bright colours. Basically saying, just leave me alone, I can dress however I want. But then in other interviews, she kind of encourages it. She says, oh yeah, this is where my dress was from. Now let me talk to you about this. Kind of manages to sort of bring in another subject. And she makes herself so visible. She doesn't fit in, she stands out. And that means, in some aspects, she's listened to, she's heard, and people do talk about her.
We need to do a whole podcast on her.
Yeah, that I would advocate that. She's so amazing, and she was an unmarried independent woman who had a flat covered in zebra print bedding, which I just think is fabulous in the 1930s. But she was MP for this very male-dominated industrial Catholic constituency, and who they absolutely loved her. They trusted her to speak for her. So she really speaks to changing attitudes to political women, especially when you look back at the treatment of a lot of the suffragettes and suffragists and how they were caricatured for how they dressed. They were turned into masculine old spinsters. This isn't happening to Ellen. She's in a way celebrated for how she's dressed. But on the other hand, there's two sides to the modern woman and the fashions of the modern woman and how they're used in Parliament. Because there's Ellen, who represents this great independent modern woman, and she dresses like that and she talks like that, and that's wonderful. But then in 1928, when all women over 21 given the vote, the sort of flapper election, as it's called, because so many of these young modern women are suddenly able to vote for the first time, is that in a lot of the election propaganda, you get the Labour Party using it to their advantage. So on all of their posters, they're using flapper imagery and women in cloth hats with the shingled hair, like very Singing in the Rain, very, that kind of look, with Ramsay MacDonald, leader of the party, who is equally just as suave and stylish, while the Conservative leaders are in the background in very old Victorian style suits. So they're showing that actually the Labour Party is the fashionable party for the modern young woman. This is who you should be voting for. Whilst in other the postcards that we had on display in the exhibition, which showed a woman a flapper woman coming to vote, and she's been asked who she wants to vote for, and she's like, oh, the man in the fours, which is a very fashionable suit. So it's almost mocking the fashionable young women, the modern young woman. They'll only vote for the person who looks the best rather than who has the best policies. So they're still getting that misogyny in on how these women dress. They're still making a judgment on their clothes, not judging them as voters particularly well.
I love it, because they are undoubtedly manipulating fashion to their advantage. But do they ever challenge it? Are they ever like not having it and they decide to do things a different way?
I think we've seen that so much historically. When we were curating Represent, we really wanted examples of that. But I think and we see that, in a lot in sort of second wave feminism with challenging a lot of the percentages, the most famous thing is, to say bra burning. But I don't think that's such a fashionable thing as a political statement. But one of my favourite stories of women using their voice to challenge fashion is something that I don't think you would expect. It's another woman who lives in Manchester, I don't just about women who live in Manchester, but they have to come up in my line of work quite a lot. And this is Emily Williamson, and she sets up the RSPB, she sets up the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, because she's so horrified about how many birds are being killed for plumage, which, is feathers in women's hats and on women's clothes. And she actually said, if you become a member of the Anti-Plumage Society, as the organisation was founded, she said you have to boycott wearing feathers. You can't wear feathers on any of your outfits. And for this to happen in the late Victorian period, it's quite, feathers were in vogue. Everyone wore feathers. Hats, clothes, brooches, everything. Had some kind of plumage on it. So it's such a small act that it's just amazing to think that small act of saying, I'm not going to wear feathers, and she encouraged other women not to, has grown into, a charity today with over millions of members.
Just sticking with the exhibition a second, how many correlations do you see between this and the modern day?
It's just so many. What was most amazing to me was how many contemporary women campaigners and activists were using the green, white, purple of the suffrage colours, and really forging that link between past and present, between almost forming like a sisterhood with the women who'd come before them. Not only, some women on the marches who, we photographed and spoke to, actively dressed as suffragettes. They wanted to invoke it so much, but others just used colours. And one of the most, evoking images from the exhibition was we displayed the Sisters Uncut jumpsuit, which Sisters Uncut are an incredible grassroots campaign group who fight against cuts to domestic violence services. And you might know them from they have carried out their campaigns and moments of kind of quite militant activism on the red carpet at the Suffragette film premiere, where they kind of lay on the red carpet and at BAFTAs. And it was the jumpsuit that one of the women had worn to the BAFTAs protest, which is just it's a black jumpsuit and it's homemade. Again, that this idea of homemade fashion, to wear at protest is something that's happened over the past 200 years. It's such a domestic skill that is so often associated to women that is being usurped as something challenging the norm, which I think is really important. And the Sisters Uncut jumpsuit is homemade, and it had the image, the logo of Sisters Uncut on the front of the jumpsuit in that purple and green. So again, amazing to see, and the way they were handled after this red carpet and taken off by security, you could have picked that image and dropped it into a photograph of being arrested. Those famous images that are now quite iconic of them being dragged off the streets and away from marches. And it's just amazing to see that those colours still being evoked, nearly 100 years later.
So what I love about this diary entry of Queen Mary's, in that she absolutely supports women and women's rights and everything they're fighting for, but she just wishes they'd stop throwing themselves at the royal cars and clinging to the bonnets everywhere that they go. She just thinks it's very unseemly. I mean, she is a massive feminist. She completely has got George V under the thumb. But she's like, I do wish they'd behave better. There's a bit of a disconnect there between agreeing with them and their methods.
I think a lot of people would still say that today about things like Extinction Rebellion and, you know, things that really upset day-to-day activities, you know, and kind of cause a bit of a nuisance. I think people still get a bit riled up by that.
I think we should all, the three of us, we should start our own fashion movement, the women of history.
I'm totally on board with that. Totally.
We could do like history hack accessories for people like Ellen Wilkinson and stuff.
Oh my God.
Everyone loves a badge. Everyone. This is what I've learned, like, through this, is that even things like, even anything that is a symbol of something you want to support or something with the suffrage on, even if it's just a badge, that they're the things that you see. And I love it when you can kind of spot another woman or another person wearing the same badge you are, and you kind of feel that little bit of solidarity. It's quite nice. And again, it's like wearing your activism on your sleeve. It's a really, I guess, bonding experience.
And controversially, though, one women's fashion thing I cannot abide is those baby on board badges, because it's like they're saying, get out of my way, I'm more important than you, give me your seat.
Do you want to know something really, really, really...
It's controversial, but they really get on my nerves. I can see you're pregnant. I would have got up for you, but now you've worn a sign that basically demands it, and I feel like I don't want it.
This is ideal, because every time I think of something, and I think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, you say it. Perfect.
I know.
In sync. Love this.
Yeah. Sadly, for the rest of the planet, you and I are on entirely the same wavelength.
Do you know what?
Just to admit it, Helen, those badges are pretentious.
I don't live in London, so I don't come across them that often. I had to really think. I was like, what's the baby on board badges? But yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah, they are, yeah. It's very interesting. The ones that get me, and this is probably one of the most controversial things, weirdly controversial things we had in the exhibition, and actually I'm really glad that people were annoyed by it, because I was secretly annoyed by it, but when you're a curator you have to be very impartial.
Yeah.
You write the things. And it was the t-shirt that said, this is what a feminist looks like. That the Fawcett Society released, and which are great, and the Fawcett Society, brilliant. I can't speak against them. When they were worn in Parliament, and I'm also thinking, these are made in sweatshops. These t-shirts are not ethically made.
And I see the principle, because anyone could put one on, and that would convey a message. But it's also saying, it's like saying, I look more feminist than you do, because I've got a t-shirt that says so.
Absolutely. And it's almost like, do you practice what you preach? Because I remember seeing a lot of MPs wearing them. And I just remember thinking, okay, well, what? No
concern really for the 8-year-old Bengali girl that stitched it together.
Absolutely.
You laugh, but it's true.
No, I know. It's just
Primark do it as well. It's like they get 9p a day or whatever, and like, here I am championing women while they're starving because they're making my t-shirt.
And there's definitely been a bit of a fashion trend with like the word feminist and woman and sisterhood, and a lot of these kind of once quite grassroots words and things that, especially working at the People's History Museum, you saw those words around things like green and common and, real moments of change for women. And suddenly they're on like a diary and paper chase.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to sound a bit snobbish, being like, you can't have that diary until you go and find out.
But buying a diary does not make you a feminist.
Yeah. Exactly.
I've got my diary says I am, but then equally I really resent these people. I mean, I basically had my vagina confiscated on Twitter because I wasn't feminist enough, because in my world, if a woman acts like a dick, then you can tell her that without being the feminist antichrist.
There's so much hinged on it, isn't there?
It's just like there's ownership issues, isn't there, with who gets to call themselves and who doesn't, which I don't think is right. I think it's like religion. Do it your way and leave everybody else to do it their way, and stop being judgy.
I mean, I don't call myself a feminist. I just support equal rights at the end of the day, because there's too many labels, and I just support equality. That's it.
Yeah. And likewise, if you're going to tell a guy that he's being a mansplaining dick, then you should tell a woman if she's being a dick as well. There's none of this, but we're all sisters together and we should all just support each other even if we're dicks. No.
You're a dick.
No.
End of.
You're a dick.
And, you know, this is so funny how many people came to the exhibition, and it was, in a way, it was great because we provided a space to people to be able to have those conversations, you know, for people to be really honest and open about, because it's not this perfect world of green, white, purple. You can't stitch a badge onto your, you know, tote bag or whatever and suddenly have all the principles down. And, you know, people are going to have different opinions and have opposite opinions, and that's okay. You know, that's debate and that's discussion, and I think we should be more encouraged of that than we should be. Everyone needs to have the same opinion on everything all the time.
I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. Helen, listen, thank you so much for joining us. That was so insightful.
Thank you for having me. I've had an amazing time.
It was seriously, do you know what? And I even got to throw in Keira Knightley and Georgiana Cavendish and the Duchess. So I
knew you were going to pronounce it wrong. I was looking at the notes and I was like, apparently it's Georgiana.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Georgiana Cavendish. There we go. I've corrected myself. We'll get Alex.
This is like the whole Ralph Rafe debate, isn't it, in
sake.
oldie English names?
Well, if you're ever doing an episode just talking about, you know, historical period dramas, just give me a call. I'm so on board.
Oh my God, definitely.
Absolutely.
I can hear Alex go, yes, oh my God, yes.
When I said we need to do an Ellen Wilkinson podcast, what I meant was Helen needs to do an Ellen Wilkinson podcast for us. That was my subtle way of telling you that your presence is required again.
Anytime, honestly.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me.
Join us tomorrow when we'll be hosting another Shark reunion. Jason Salke's been busily plotting again and he's managed to round up some heroes of Series 2 for you. We'll be talking to the fabulous Philip Whitchurch, Michael Mears, Lyndon Davis, Nicholas Rowe, Theodore Atkeen and Nicholas Grace. And also Marcus Cribb will be there because it wouldn't be one without him. Hanging around and fanboying, basically. And he's also there to field any actual history questions if we stop mucking about long enough to get them. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there and we have our own channel and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe. Don't forget, you can become a patron of History Hack for as little as $1 a month. Just go to www.historyhack.podbean.com. It will help us keep going in the aftermath of the coronavirus, and we would really appreciate it, as we would love to do so.